Sarah has always been intrigued by clowns, especially the ones who perform at the circus. She loves the bright colors of their outfits and the way they make people laugh. One day, she hears about the legend of the cursed clown who haunts the town. The story goes that anyone who sees the clown will be cursed for life. Sarah is skeptical but curious, and decides to investigate the legend. She does some research online and asks around, but no one seems to know much about the clown. She decides to explore the old abandoned circus on the outskirts of town, hoping to find some clues. As Sarah explores the circus, she comes across an old book lying on the ground. The book looks ancient and is covered in dust. She opens it and starts to read. The book is a spell book filled with strange and cryptic symbols. As she reads, she comes across a spell that promises to summon the cursed clown. She thinks it's just a silly game and decides to try it out. She recites the spell, not expecting anything to happen. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes. The air grows cold, and Sarah feels a chill run down her spine. She hears a sound, a low rumbling noise that seems to be coming from all around her. She starts to panic and tries to run, but she can't seem to find her way out of the circus. She sees a figure in the distance, a figure that seems to be moving towards her. As it gets closer, she realizes with horror that it's the cursed clone. The cursed clone starts to taunt Sarah, saying that she has summoned him, and now he will never leave her alone. She tries to run, but he seems to be everywhere she goes. She starts to experience terrifying nightmares and hallucinations of the clone. She becomes increasingly paranoid and begins to isolate herself from her friends and family. She starts to research the history of the circus and the legend of the cursed clone, hoping to find a way to break the curse. Sarah discovers that the cursed clone was once a real clone, a man named Jean who worked at the circus. He was a loner and had few friends, but he loved his job and his life at the circus. One day he disappeared and no one ever saw him again. It was rumored that he had gone mad and had become the cursed, haunting the circus and its visitors. Sarah seeks the help of a local occultist, who tells her that the only way to break the curse is to defeat the clone in a battle of wills. Sarah prepares for the battle with the clone. She studies the spells in the book and trains her mind to resist the clone's psychological attacks. She tries to find the courage to face him and break the curse. She spends long hours in meditation and practices visualization exercises, trying to build up her mental strength. Finally, she feels ready to confront the cursed clone. The final showdown takes place in the abandoned circus. Sarah and the cursed clone engage in a terrifying battle of wills. The clone tries to scare her and break her spirit, but Sarah stays strong. She used the spells from the book and her own mental powers to fight back. Finally, she defeats the clone and breaks the curse. The clone disappears, and Sarah is left alone in the circus, feeling both triumphant and terrified. Sarah leaves the circus, knowing that she will never be the same again. She has learned the hard way that some legends are best left alone. She realizes that the cursed clone was not just a figment of her imagination or a made-up story, but a real entity with the power to inflict harm. She feels relieved that the curse is broken but also traumatized by her experience. Over time, Sarah starts to regain her confidence and rebuild her life. She shares her story with others and warns them about the dangers of dabbling in the occult and summoning unknown forces. She becomes an advocate for mental health and encourages others to seek help if they experience similar traumas. The legend of the cursed clone lives on, but Sarah has finally put the curse to rest. She knows that she will always be haunted by her experience, but she has also gained the strength and resilience to face any challenge that comes her way. The small town of Willow Creek was known for its peaceful surroundings and friendly locals, but that all changed when the clones started to appear. At first it was just one or two, but soon there were dozens of them, roaming the streets, parks, and playgrounds. The townspeople thought it was just a harmless prank, but they soon realized that something was not right. People started to disappear without a trace, and strange occurrences began to happen. The local library was vandalized, and a house was set on fire. The clones were always near me, watching and waiting. The locals began to feel uneasy, but they couldn't quite put their finger on why. One day, the circus came to town, and with it came more clones. The performers were talented and put on a spectacular show, but the townspeople couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The clones seemed to be everywhere, watching and waiting.
One night, a group of teenagers sneaked into the circus grounds to investigate.
They found a strange ritual taking place, led by the clones. The teenagers were discovered, and they barely escaped with their lives. They knew then that the clones were not just harmless pranksters but something far more sinister. The first attack happened during a children's party. The clown's smile turned into a menacing grin, and he started to chase the children. They ran for their lives, but some were caught and never seen again. The townspeople were horrified, and the police were called. The police tried to investigate the disappearances, but they were met with a wall of silence. The circus performers refused to cooperate, and the clones seemed to disappear whenever the police were near. The townspeople started to take matters into their own hands, but it only made things worse. The townspeople formed a vigilant group, determined to uncover the truth. They found evidence of a secret cult, led by the clones, who were sacrificing people to an ancient deity. The townspeople were shocked by what they had discovered, but they were also relieved that they had finally found a way to fight back. The police and the vigilantes joined forces, and they launched a raid on the circus. It was a brutal fight, with many casualties on both sides. The townspeople were horrified by the carnage, but they knew that it was a necessary evil to stop the clones once and for all. The final showdown took place under the big top. The townspeople, armed with weapons, confronted the clones. It was a bloody battle, with casualties on both sides, but in the end, the townspeople emerged victorious. The clones were unmasked, revealing their true identities as a group of deranged killers. The town never fully recovered from the horrors that had taken place. The circus was shut down, and the memory of the clones haunted the town for years to come. The survivors lived with the knowledge that evil could lurk behind the most innocent of facades, and that the line between joy and terror was thinner than they ever imagined. The events of that summer remained a dark chapter in the town's history, and the locals hoped that they would never have to face anything like it again. But as the years passed, rumors began to circulate that the clones had not been destroyed completely and that they were still out there, waiting for their next victim. The town of Millfield was buzzing with excitement as the circus arrived in town. Children and adults alike couldn't wait to see the acrobats, the strongmen, and the animals. But as the big top went up and the circus performers began to arrive, something was different. There was a new attraction this year, a troupe of sinister clones. At first, people were curious about the clones. They seemed to be everywhere, lurking in the shadows, watching the townsfolk with their painted-on smiles. But beneath the makeup, there was something dark and malevolent. People began to disappear, and rumors circulated that the clones were responsible. As the days passed, the townsfolk grew increasingly uneasy. The clones seemed to be everywhere, always watching, always smiling. They would show unexpectedly, in the park, on the street, or even in people's homes. Their presence was unnerving, and people began to avoid the circus altogether. But the clones were persistent. They would show up at schools and playgrounds, trying to lure children away with their silly antics. And every time someone disappeared, the clones seemed to be the only common link. When a young girl vanished after a trip to the circus, the police began to investigate. They soon discovered that the clone troupe had a sinister history, a string of disappearances and murders that stretched back decades. But the clones were elusive, always one step ahead of the law. As the investigation deepened, the townsfolk grew increasingly afraid. They stopped going out at night, and children were kept indoors after dark. The circus continued to perform, drawing crowds despite the rumors of danger. But the clones seemed to be getting bolder, more brazen in their attacks. When a group of teenagers stumbled upon the clones' lair, they knew they had to act fast. Armed with nothing but their wits and a few improvised weapons, they set out to put an end to the clones' reign of terror. The lair was a dark and twisted place, filled with gruesome artifacts and evidence of the clones' crimes. The teenagers fought bravely, but the clones were strong and cunning. It was a battle of wits and strength, with each side trying to outsmart the other. In the end, the teenagers were able to defeat the clones and bring them to justice. The police arrested the surviving members of the troupe, and they were tried and convicted for their crimes. But the town was never the same. The memories of the killer clones lingered, haunting the residents for years to come. Years later, a new circus came to Millfield. The townsfolk were initially hesitant to attend, but curiosity eventually got the better of them. To their surprise, the new circus was filled with wonder and joy, with no hint of the darkness that had plagued its predecessor. But as the people left the circus, they couldn't help but glance nervously over their shoulders, wondering if the killer clones would ever return. The memory of the terror they had inflicted on the town was still fresh, a reminder that evil could lurk behind the most innocent of facades. The small town of Millfield was always quiet, but when the circus came to town, everything changed. The children were excited to see the clones, and parents were looking forward to the acrobats and the animal show. The circus performers had arrived in their caravans, and the town was buzzing with excitement. However, as soon as the clones stepped out of their caravan, there was something off about them. Their painted-on smiles seemed to be too wide, and their eyes seemed to be constantly following the children around the town. As the days went by, the clones began to make appearances around town. They would pop up in unexpected places, and children would always be drawn to them. The clones would make balloon animals and perform silly tricks, but there was always an eerie feeling around them. When the children of Millfield started having birthday parties, they all wanted a clone to come and perform. The parents hired a clone named Happy, who was known for his balloon animals and silly jokes. The children were excited to have him at their party, and everything seemed to be going well. However, as the party went on, Happy became increasingly agitated. When a child accidentally popped one of his balloons, he flew into a rage and started yelling at the children. The children were scared and the parents were shocked by his sudden change in behavior. After the party, the parents started to notice strange things happening around their homes. Objects would move by themselves, and strange noises could be heard in the night. Some parents even claimed that they saw a clone standing outside their child's window. They started to wonder if Happy had brought something with him to the party, something dark and sinister. When children started disappearing from Millfield, the town went into panic mode. The police couldn't find any leads and the parents were desperate for answers. The whole town was in shock and the children were too scared to leave their homes. One night, a group of parents decided to take matters into their own hands and went to confront the clones at the circus. As they approached the circus, they noticed that something was different. The lights were dimmed, and there was an eerie silence in the air. As they got closer, they could see that the clones were gathered around something. When they got closer, they saw that the clones were holding a child, tied up and gagged. The parents were horrified and tried to rescue the child, but the clones wouldn't let them go. Just when all seemed lost, the unexpected happened. The child broke free from the clones and ran towards the parents. As the child got closer, the parents realized that it wasn't a child at all. It was a young woman who had disappeared from the town years ago. The clones had been holding her captive all this time, and she had finally managed to escape. The town was in shock, and the clones were never seen in Millfield again, or so they thought. Years had passed since the disappearance of the clones from Millfield. The town had slowly started to recover from the trauma, and life had returned to some sense of normalcy. However, one day, the circus announced that it was coming back to town. This time, the town was filled with dread instead of excitement. The parents of Millfield knew that they had to protect their children, and they did everything they could to keep them away from the circus. But there was something different about the clones this time. They were more menacing than before, and they seemed to be watching the children even more closely.
One night, a group of parents decided to investigate the circus. They snuck into the circus grounds and
Were shocked by what they saw. The clones were holding a group of children captive, and they were planning to take them away from the town forever. The parents knew that they had to act quickly, and they came up with a plan to save the children. The parents of Millfield knew that they couldn't rely on the police to save their children. They had to take matters into their own hands. They put together a plan to infiltrate the circus and rescue the children. They armed themselves with whatever they could find and headed to the circus grounds. As they made their way towards the clones' caravan, they were met with resistance. The clones had prepared for their arrival and were ready to defend themselves. A battle ensued, and the parents fought tooth and nail to save their children. It was a brutal fight, but in the end, the parents emerged victorious. The clones were defeated, and the children were saved. The parents of Millfield had proven that they would do anything to protect their children. However, there was one more surprise in store for them. As they were leaving the circus grounds, they saw a figure in the distance. It was a clone, and it was watching them. The parents were unsure of what to do, but the clone simply stood there and watched them. After a few minutes, the clone turned around and disappeared into the night. The parents knew that they had seen the last of the clones in Millfield, but they couldn't shake off the feeling that something else was coming. The town had been through so much already, but they knew that they had to stay vigilant, just in case. The parents of Millfield never forgot the terror that the clones had brought to their town. Even though they had defeated the clones and saved their children, they knew that they had to stay vigilant. They couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Despite their fears, life in Millfield slowly returned to normal. The town became a little quieter, and the streets were a little emptier. But the people of Millfield persevered. They came together to support one another and to rebuild their community. However, every now and then, the parents of Millfield would catch a glimpse of a shadow in the distance. They would look closer, and they would see a clone watching them. The clones had become a legend in Millfield, a reminder of the terror that they had brought to the town. Years went by, and the clones became nothing more than a distant memory. The children who had been held captive by the clones grew up and left Millfield, and new families moved in. The town slowly started to forget about the clones, and life returned to some sense of normalcy. But one day, a new family moved into Millfield, and they brought with them a small circus. The parents of Millfield looked on in horror as they saw the clones once again. The memories of the past came floating back, and the parents knew that they had to act quickly to protect their children. The shadow of the clones still loomed over Millfield, and the parents knew that they would always have to be vigilant. The clones may have been defeated, but their legacy lived on, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the shadows. As a child, Timmy had always been afraid of clones, but he never imagined that his fear would one day become a reality. One evening, as he was walking home from a friend's house, a clone jumped out from behind a tree and attacked him. Timmy tried to fight back, but the clone was too strong. He blacked out, and when he woke up, he was covered in blood. Timmy's parents rushed him to the hospital, where he was treated for his injuries, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to the emotional trauma he had experienced. From that day forward, Timmy was plagued by nightmares about the killer clone. Detective Jameson was assigned to the case. He was determined to catch the killer, but he had no leads. All he knew was that the clone had struck again, this time at a local carnival. Jameson arrived at the scene to find a gruesome sight. The clone had brutally murdered several carnival workers, leaving their bodies strewn about the grounds. Jameson immediately called for backup and began combing the area for clues. But the killer had left no fingerprints, nothing that could identify him. As the weeks went by, Jameson's frustration grew. He knew the killer was still out there, but he had no idea where to look. Then one day, he received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen a clone leaving a building downtown. Jameson and his team rushed to the scene and found a small, rundown theater. They burst in, guns drawn, and found the clone sitting on the stage, covered in blood. But as Jameson approached the killer, he noticed something strange. The clone's makeup was smudged, revealing a familiar face. It was Timmy, the boy who had been attacked years before. Timmy's eyes were wild with fear and confusion as Jameson read him his rights. Before he could be taken away, Timmy let out a blood-curdling scream. He had been possessed by the spirit of the real killer, a deranged clone who had been terrorizing the town for years. The possessed Timmy lunged at Jameson, and a struggle ensued. But with the help of his team, Jameson was able to subdue the killer and bring him to justice. Timmy was left to deal with the aftermath of his possession, haunted by the memories of the crimes he had committed. After the trial, Timmy was sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. He was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, a condition in which a person has multiple distinct personalities. It was determined that Timmy's traumatic experience as a child had caused him to develop a secondary personality, that of the killer clone. Through intensive therapy and medication, Timmy was able to control his alter ego and eventually integrate it back into his own identity. But the memories of the crimes he had committed were still vivid in his mind, and he struggled with guilt and remorse. Years passed, and Timmy was released from the psychiatric facility. He tried to move on with his life, but the townspeople would never forget what had happened. He was constantly reminded of his past, and he began to feel like a prisoner in his own hometown. One day, while walking down the street, Timmy saw a group of children playing. They were dressed in clown costumes, laughing and running around. Timmy felt a surge of anger and fear wash over him, and he realized that he would never truly be free from the shadow of the killer clone. As Timmy walked away from the children, he noticed a man watching him from across the street. The man was tall and wore a black suit with a strange symbol embroidered on his lapel. Timmy felt a shiver run down his spine, and he quickened his pace. But the man followed him, staying just out of sight. Timmy's heart was pounding in his chest as he ducked into an alleyway, hoping to lose his pursuer. But the man was too quick, and he cornered Timmy against a brick wall. The man spoke in a low, menacing voice. "You thought you could escape from me, Tommy, but you were wrong. I'm the true master of the clone's power, and I have come to claim what is mine." Timmy felt a surge of fear and anger, and he lashed out at the man. But the man was too strong, and he overpowered Timmy easily. Timmy felt his consciousness slipping away as the man began to speak in a strange language, invoking the power of the clone. But just as Timmy was about to succumb to the man's power, he heard a familiar voice. It was Detective Jameson, who had been watching from a nearby rooftop. He shouted a warning to the man, and the man turned to face him. In that moment of distraction, Timmy was able to break free from the man's grasp. He ran toward Jameson, who caught him and led him to safety. The man in the black suit vanished into the night, but Timmy knew that he would never be truly safe from the power of the clone. In the aftermath of the encounter, Timmy decided to leave the town for good. He knew that he could never escape the memories of his past, but he wanted to start fresh in a new place, where no one knew his story. As he drove away from the town, Timmy looked back one last time. He saw the silhouette of a clone standing in the shadows, watching him leave. Timmy shuddered, but he knew that he was strong enough to face whatever came next. Timmy drove for hours, unsure of where he was going. He just knew that he needed to get as far away as possible from the town where his nightmares become a reality. Eventually, he found himself in a small coastal town, surrounded by the soothing sounds of waves crashing against the shore. The town was quiet and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos and horror he had experienced before. Timmy felt a sense of relief wash over him, and he decided that this would be his new home. Timmy quickly settled into his new life in the coastal town. He got a job at a local restaurant and made new friends. He felt like he had finally left the past behind him. But as the months went by, Timmy began to experience strange occurrences. He would hear children's laughter in the distance and catch glimpses of a clone in his peripheral vision. He tried to brush it off as his imagination, but the sightings became more frequent and intense. One day, Timmy received a letter in the mail. It was written in a shaky, child-like scrawl and was addressed to Timmy the clone killer. Timmy's heart skipped a beat as he opened the letter. His worst fears confirmed. The letter was from a child who claimed to have been possessed by the spirit of the clone. The child begged Timmy to help him, to exorcise the demon that had taken over his body. Timmy felt a surge of anger and despair. He had thought he had left the clone and all its horrors behind him, but it seemed that it would always follow him. Despite his reservations, Timmy knew he had to help the child. He researched exorcism techniques and consulted with experts in the field. He even visited a psychic who confirmed that the child was indeed possessed by the same entity that had taken hold of Timmy years ago. Armed with this knowledge, Timmy set out to save the child. He found the child and performed the exorcism, calling upon all his strength and willpower to defeat the evil clone spirit. After the exorcism, Timmy felt a sense of relief and closure. He had faced his demons and emerged victorious. He realized that he had a purpose, to help others who had fallen victim to the same fate as he had. Timmy became a renowned exorcist, helping countless people overcome their possessions and banishing the spirits that haunted them. He felt like he had finally found his calling, and that his past experiences had prepared him for this mission. Years passed, and Timmy became an old man. He knew that his time on this earth was coming to an end, but he felt at peace. He had lived a life of purpose, helping others and facing his own demons. As he lay on his death, Timmy felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see the silhouette of a clone, but instead of fear, he felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the clone had led him down a dark path, but it had also given him the strength and courage to overcome it. Timmy closed his eyes and took his last breath, content in the knowledge that he had lived a life of meaning and purpose. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories.